Jimmy Butler has been suspended for another 2 games. We'll tell you what happened, take you behind the scenes, and talk about what happens next here on Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, going solo here for a quick update, breaking news on the Jimmy Butler situation. Waited to record this until Thursday morning because Shams Charania tweeted around 5 o'clock in the evening, Wednesday evening, that Jimmy Butler was going to be suspended for 2 games, but didn't get a statement from the Miami Heat until about 6.5 hours after that, 11:30 p.m., 11:28 exactly. The Heat released their official statement talking about why Jimmy Butler was suspended. So we're going to get into all of that here in a second, but a quick reminder that if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button right now. Like the video on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, you can find the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get them. You can find us over there. We're coming out with like multiple shows a day now as we keep track of the Jimmy Butler situation. If you missed our latest episode before this, we had ESPN's Tim Bontemps on to discuss why this Jimmy Butler trade hasn't happened yet and why it might not be a slam dunk. We talk about all the kind of loose ends that need to be tied there in terms of getting Jimmy to Phoenix and whether this is going to get done before the trade deadline. Also, if you haven't already, check out the Locked On Heat Insider community. You can sign up with the link in the show notes. We are sharing all of the up-to-date information. When we can't jump on here for a breaking news podcast or in between podcasts, we're sharing the latest intel that I have, not just from my own reporting and David's own reporting, but also from the national reporting. So you don't have to go find that. We're just giving you up-to-the-minute updates as best we can over there. Free for 14 days, $4.99 a month after that. You can cancel at any time, but now's the time to get in as we have 2 weeks before the trade deadline here. And some of what I'm about to say, you would already know if you were following along on the Locked On Heat Insider community. So let's jump right in. The Heat statement released at 11:28 p.m. Wednesday night. We have suspended Jimmy Butler for 2 games for continued pattern of disregard of team rules, insubordinate conduct, and conduct detrimental to the team, including missing today's team flight to Milwaukee. Let's talk about the flight first. This had been reported by Shams, again, several hours before the statement came out. There was some confusion. It got word on social media. There was some confusion about the Heat. Did they move the flight? Why did Jimmy Butler miss it? Did Jimmy Butler tell them? Whatever it was. Maybe some people making excuses for Jimmy Butler on social media saying, well, they moved the flight. That's why he missed it. Not his fault. You can't suspend him for the flight there. The fact of the matter is the rest of the team made the flight. The rest of the team made the flight out to Milwaukee. And Jimmy Butler did not. Now, Jimmy Butler had planned to meet the Heat in Milwaukee Wednesday night, take his own plane and meet the team there. Now, was that communicated to the Miami Heat or not? Did Jimmy Butler say ahead of time, hey, listen, I can't make it. You guys go. I'll take my own PJ and I'll make it to Milwaukee in time for tomorrow's game? Or did he just miss the flight entirely and plan to meet them and was, to use Miami's word in the statement, insubordinate, right? Either way, in the eyes of the Miami Heat, it doesn't matter. Jimmy Butler requested a trade. He is no longer their star player. He's not playing like it. He is not acting like it. And so the Heat, in their view, aren't going to give him the star player treatment. Star players take their own flights often enough. Regularly is probably a too strong of a word. Even Jimmy Butler, some of the news that's been out after the Ramona Shelburne story that he's like always taking his own team flight is pretty far from the truth. And Shelburne didn't report that, but that's sort of how it's been taken online here. He would just occasionally do it, which is, again, a thing that stars in the NBA can do because Jimmy Butler's schedule is just different than Pelle Larsson's schedule, right? He's got a lot of off-the-court business things that he's dealing with. Sometimes you have other obligations, sponsorship events, things like that. And so occasionally star players will just take separate flights than the rest of the team during the season. Now, Jimmy Butler would do that, not all the time. The Heat clearly, don't have any patience or leeway for that anymore. And they're also, I think, looking for reasons to suspend Jimmy Butler, right? Like this has gone back and forth here for a while, and I think that is pretty clear here. So either way, whether he communicated with the team or not, they're not going to have any patience for it, and so they go ahead and suspend Jimmy Butler. The other part about this too is disregard of team rules, insubordinate conduct, and conduct detrimental to the team. So when you look at disregard for team rules and insubordinate conduct, that's the team flight stuff. Maybe he didn't, it could include other things like missing shoot-arounds, missing practices. There's a lot of things that could be included in that language. The conduct detrimental to the team also is the same language that the Heat used for the first 7-game suspension. And that's important here because now we're talking about stuff on the court as well. Conduct detrimental to the team can include things on the court. And Jimmy Butler hasn't dogged it the way that he did against New Orleans and Indiana, which led to that 7-game suspension where he took scored 18 points across 2 games and was just clearly just standing in the corner and not caring. It hasn't been as bad, but it hasn't been that much better either, right? So here's Bobby Marks, who on Twitter last night after the suspension came down, cited information gathered by ESPN Stat and Information and Second Spectrum. And here's what he says in terms of the stats of what Jimmy Butler has done. He's attempted fewer than 10 field goal attempts in 4 of the last 5 games. He moved at a fast speed against Portland, more than a fast speed being 14 feet per second at least, 5% of the time, his second lowest percentage in a game in which he played at least 20 minutes this season. He took a shot on 14% of his touches, third lowest percentage in a game this season, and he passed the ball on 76% of his touches, tied for his second highest percentage in a game this season. This wasn't Jimmy Butler being unselfish. This was Jimmy Butler. I was there in the arena, getting the ball, tossing it to a teammate, and then jogging down and standing in the corner or parking himself in the dunker spot under the basket. And in a game where Tyler Hero was out, there was no excuse. And the Heat dropped back to 500 after losing to what at that point was a 14-win Portland Trailblazers team. For Jimmy Butler to not do more in that game, I think rubbed the Heat the wrong way. There is a very real basketball thing happening here in terms of Miami's playoff push. They are slipping in the East standings, and they don't have any patience for it, which brings us back to this road trip. There is an understanding that the Heat need to win these games in Milwaukee on Thursday night and then over the weekend in Brooklyn. As they continue, this team knows it can't afford to fall below 500 in the Eastern Conference. So Jimmy Butler has not been helpful to them on the court. I said after one of the recent postgame shows, they're playing around him. And I mean quite literally playing around him. What I mean by that is Jaime Jaquez Jr. having to dribble around Jimmy Butler standing in the paint just to go get a layup. They're playing around this guy. He's a distraction on and off the court. And we can get into the reasons why, but that's not important, at least right now, because the Heat know that to make this playoff push, they are better off without Jimmy Butler if Jimmy Butler is going to be playing like this. And Jimmy Butler has no reason to not play like this. Jimmy Butler wants to be out of here. I think before that Trailblazers game, the report of the Phoenix Suns trading their first-round pick for 3 first-round pick comes down. He's wearing the Phoenix Suns colored shoes on the court in that game. He probably thought he was going to be out of here sooner rather than later. And so he's got no reason to care, no reason to make team flights and all these things also. So these two teams, both parties, Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat, are clearly at an impasse here. The Heat are really hoping to get this trade done soon, before the trade deadline. They would love to have this done by Sunday, which would mean that Jimmy Butler played his last game in a Miami Heat uniform. Also noticeable here, has not played in a road game since December 16th in Detroit. That was his 35-point, 19-rebound, 10-assist, triple-double. That was the last road game that Jimmy Butler played. The other 7-game suspension was tied directly to their road trip. They did not want Jimmy Butler on the road. The Heat understand that they have a better chance of controlling the situation, not controlling Jimmy Butler necessarily, but controlling the situation at home for a lot of reasons, right? No team flights, no team hotels, none of that kind of stuff. Everybody's just, in there. Everybody knows where to be, but also the local media there's an understanding with the local media and there's a familiarity with the local media. So if the Heat are trying to curb questions, outside questions, media questions about Jimmy Butler, they have a better chance doing that here than they do on the road, right? And we even saw Eric Spoelstra come into the pregame press conference before the Spurs game and come in with a prepared statement, right, to try to dissuade questions about Jimmy Butler. He does not say Jimmy Butler's name in these press conferences anymore, right? And so there's a familiarity, there's an understanding, and there's a comfortability with that with the local media. That's not the case on the road, right? You're going to get prying questions about Jimmy Butler on the road. We saw that the last road trip. I think it was in Los Angeles and in Sacramento and things like that, where Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero had to were asked questions about Jimmy Butler, and that's still going to happen, right? That's still going to happen in Milwaukee and certainly in Brooklyn with the New York-based media. That's still going to happen. But what this really does, by keeping Jimmy Butler away for the team on the road, it removes the chance of Jimmy Butler having another sort of post Pacers game moment where he talks about, I can't find joy on the court, and essentially requests his trade or acts as the preamble to his official trade request later that night. You keep that from happening, because when you're on the road, there is an expectation that you make your star players available, right? Like, this is, one of the few times that reporters in Brooklyn and Milwaukee have a chance to interact with a star player like Jimmy Butler. And so there's an expectation by the league that you make your star players available. Well, if Jimmy Butler is suspended, well, then obviously he can't be made available. So the Heat don't want Jimmy Butler on the road with them. That much has been made very clear. What happens next is a great question. Again, the Heat are trying to have this done as soon as possible. Tons of loose ends still to be answered here. Chris Haynes reported on Wednesday night that Milwaukee is not going to be a landing spot for Bradley Beal, despite some other reports. Maybe they could still get involved in a Jimmy Butler sort of framework, but them actually taking on Beal's contract, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And so the Suns and the Heat have to find a new team to send Bradley Beal to in order to send Jimmy Butler to Phoenix. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of other teams very motivated to trade for Jimmy Butler between now and the February 6th trade deadline. That can change. But right now, it just seems like Phoenix is the team most motivated to do it. And to do it, they're going to have to move Bradley Beal. Miami isn't taking Beal. Apparently, Milwaukee doesn't want Beal, so they're going to have to find another team. I've heard Toronto, Charlotte, Detroit. Those teams have been out there. I've heard a lot more about the Chicago Bulls picking up over the last week. As a Beal destination, maybe. But as a team trying to get involved in this, certainly. There have been conversations there in terms of having them involved in a framework that can involve 3, 4, 5 different teams, depending on who you talk to. So still a lot to be figured out here. The Miami Heat play in Milwaukee on Thursday night. Tyler Hero should be back from his groin strain. Jimmy Butler will not be with the team. We will be back here on Locked On Heat, me and my co-host David Ramil, with our post-game reactions and thoughts, and anything else that happens. More twists and turns on the Jimmy Butler saga sure to come. So keep it tuned in here. Locked On Heat. We'll see you tonight.